Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are. Thank you for watching as always. And just like all the time, hit the subscribe button, like our videos, share them, and hopefully, they'll bless somebody or something like that. That's why we do them, is hopefully it speaks to something going on in your life. Today, I want to talk about something. Okay, it's going to verge on politics, but it's not political, I promise, okay? So here's the deal. Right now, there's been all of these prophetic words regarding President Donald Trump, right? And some people are saying, oh, he was prophesied to be here. He was, all these things. And then now that it's not looking so good, you got these people popping up and they've got now these new prophetic words. And they're saying, oh, see, God is now prophesying he wasn't supposed to be here. Well, okay, if God prophesies something to happen, he already knows what's going to be the outcome, right? So if you have a bunch of people saying that God told him something, and to be fair, there are a lot of people who gave prophetic words regarding Donald Trump way far before he ever announced he was running for president. So while I don't want to get into that side of it, I'm just saying there was a lot of people who were prophesying him. I know Kim Clement had said stuff many years ago, specifically to Donald Trump, long before he was going to run for president. But my point isn't about Trump being spiritually appointed. That's not what I'm trying to get into today. What I want to get into is the idea that now you've got people who are prophesying the other way, and then there's people who try. Look, there's two things, okay? There is a difference between prophecy and word of knowledge, okay? And this is something that people definitely have to get into their mind when they start hearing these things. So a word of knowledge is an idea that something is going on. Usually, to me, it's always been something that's currently going on in your life, and it speaks to that, or it can speak to future events, but most of the time it speaks to past or present, right? You went through this horrible situation. I don't know you, but I know you went through something. God is revealing it to me, and I want you to know that God did it so that you could have this moment to reflect and da-da-da-da-da, okay? So that's kind of how a word of knowledge would work. It's usually looking back or to the present. It can look in the present, but usually once you get into the present, you start dealing more with prophecy than you do word of knowledge. Here's the caveat for prophecy that I see a lot of these so-called prophets miss, okay? If there's going to be a prophetic word, and you can go back and search the Bible, if you see when you see every prophetic word in the Bible, it is always referencing if you, then I. In other words, if you do this, then I, God your Father, will do that, okay? If my people who will turn from their wicked ways humble themselves and pray, then I will cleanse their land, right? There's always this thing in Scripture, and you can go back through any of it. Look at Nineveh. Jonah is sent to Nineveh to prophesy to them, turn from your wicked ways or God will destroy you. And the king of Nineveh turns from his wicked ways, takes the country, they all change, and boom, you have this change. So that's, Scripture should always, or any kind of prophecy will always have a if you, then I, okay? So if you hear somebody say, I have a prophetic word, thus saith the Lord, in 12 years you will come out of bondage. No, that doesn't work. If in 12 years you have turned from your wicked ways, then I will remove bondage, right? That's how it should work. So if you ever hear somebody say they have a prophetic word and there is no cost to the prophetic word, there's always a cost to a prophetic word. There's an expense. It means you have to change personally. Your nation has to change. An action has to take place. Again, if you humble yourselves and pray, that's an action. And then it also goes into, and turn from your wicked ways. So in other words, there's that personal responsibility that goes with it. There's that cost. You have to give up who you are and turn from that and become a God-fearing people or something like that. There's always an expense. If you stop living in this specific sin, then God will honor you. If you stop being rebellious, God will promote you. These are all different things that you should see with a prophetic word. If you and your spouse will honor God, then he will give you, whatever the desire of your heart is. But there is a cost in a prophetic term. This is not saying that God cannot just give you something. I'm specifically speaking to prophetic terms. So that does not mean that God cannot, without any reason, just bless you with something, right? Typically, you would see that you did something that God is blessing you for taking that action. But God can just bless you. I mean, it's not beyond him. What I'm specifically referring to is that when it comes to prophetic things, there should always be a cost involved. So be cautious of anybody who says they're giving prophetic words and there's no cost involved in what they're saying, because then it's not prophetic. Then immediately you should be able to check it out. It's not prophetic. So then you go down the checklist. Could it be a word of knowledge? And then there's some ways to look into that and say, okay, yeah, this is a word of knowledge, or wow, this guy's completely off. And if I got in big trouble for this, if they timestamp something and you start to realize the timestamps don't add up. And what I mean when I say timestamp, if somebody says, on Tuesday, November 4th at 3:30 p.m., God is going to bless you, right? It's not usually that specific. But if they do something like that and they timestamp the prophecy and they say, this is going to happen, and one, there's no cost, right? They just say it. Then it's a word of knowledge, but it's not even proper, because you can't have a word of knowledge for the future, in my opinion. It would then be a prophetic word. So if you will take a stand on Tuesday, November 4th, I don't even know what Tuesday is, then God will do this thing or whatever. If you just, is November 4th election day? If it is, there's no correlation there, I promise. If this is how it's running, the prophetic word will always, if it has a timestamp, will either pass or the people didn't do what was supposed to happen prior. And I was in a church where the guy would get up every Sunday and give these timestamp prophetic words. They were more word of knowledge because there was no cost involved. And he would say, oh, this thing and that thing. Well, I went to somebody, the leadership, and I said, hey, who's the false prophet standing up every Sunday? And they ended up saying, well, that's actually our pastor of prophecy in our church. If somebody's putting a timestamp on a prophecy and it never comes true, they are a false prophet. Okay, clear and simple. But again, if they're saying they're giving a prophetic word and there's no cost to it, it's not prophetic to begin with. It is a word of knowledge. So these are things you have to look out for. Don't trust people who say they're prophetic and all they do is give words of knowledge. That is not prophetic. That is word of knowledge. So there's a difference here. The other thing is, never trust anybody who declares themselves to be a prophet. The Bible is very clear that a prophet will not know they are a prophet. Other people will see the prophetic in them and will declare that they have it. So a prophet should not run around and say, thus saith the Lord, I am your prophet, da-da-da-da-da. No, God will reveal to you they are a prophetic person, and that's it. But you also have to be in tune in God to hear when he says that. So that's my thing for today. Be careful of false prophets, especially right now with this election, because there are a lot of really bad prophetic things going on. And this all came out of the other day. There was a prophetic word that my wife saw on Facebook, and she says, hey, look, Donald Trump is now going to lose the election because God's people didn't turned him into an idol. Well, that's great. That sounds wonderful, and it's very emotionally packed. And there may be some truth to it, because I do think some of God's people have started worshiping Donald Trump. But that's not the point. The point is that if God were to give a prophetic word that way, then there would have to be a cost. If my people will quit worshiping Donald Trump, then I will reinstate him as president, whatever. That's not how this was worded, so therefore it can only be a word of knowledge saying this is what's going to happen, but the person doesn't put it out the way they say it's prophetic and da-da-da-da-da. So one, either they're uneducated, or two, they're just taking a swing and a miss, because you can't do that. You can't run around and say you have a prophetic word. It's not really prophetic. So you got to start being cautious of people who run around and declare those things, because either they're just trying to, there's a lot of emotional prophets and people who do prophetic words because it feels good. And so they'll run around and give these things, and it's not actually factual. So be careful. Just be careful. Be cautious of people who say they're prophetic. Always test prophetic words. Test them against Scripture. Test them against what you know of God. Test them against God's principles and see, does this actually line up? If somebody says, hey, and I've heard this one, so don't get offended by it, but if you'll let your wife sleep with the pastor, then God will bless you this way. Okay, that does not line up with Scripture, so don't fall for that nonsense if the pastor tries to pull something like that. And I have heard of things like this, so be careful. In Africa, it's not uncommon for people to ask for payment before a prophetic word. That is wrong. You cannot do that. That does not mean that the person can't give you an on-time prophetic word or even pray, because remember, a lot of this stuff comes from the other way, but you got to be cautious, because it could also be coming from Satan at that point too. So you got to be careful. But there should never be an exchange for a prophetic word. Let me give you 3 cheeseburgers and you give me a prophetic word. No, that doesn't work that way. So, but I can tell you that there is a prophet's blessing if you host the prophet. So there is that in Scripture, that if you host the prophet and they stay in your home, then the prophet is to pray a blessing and to leave a blessing. So that's something else, but that's a whole other topic. And so just be careful. Be careful of false prophets, and always weigh out prophetic words, because you should be able to discern rather quickly if it's true or not. All right, that's it for today. Be blessed, and I will talk to you later.